Okay, bonjour tout le monde. We're going to start on our webinar today. And first of all, I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Ed Smith, and I am a French teacher at Joel Barlow High School in Reading, Connecticut. And I teach pretty much all levels from beginning all the way up to the AP level. So we're pleased to be able to offer this webinar to everyone today. So if you would like to ask a question as I'm going through the presentation, please feel free to use the chat feature. And the chat feature is that bubble up on the top next to the computer icon. So I'm actually going to use it now to just sort of send a message to everyone. So I've just sent out a message to everyone just to make sure that you're all hearing me, and you can feel free to answer in the chat and say oui or no, and we can get started. All right, great. All right, looking good, looking good. All right, so today's topic is going to be about how we can use Google Sheets to create rubrics that will actually self-calculate. And we can use Google Sheets to create it, print it out, and give it to the students, but actually we want to use some of that calculating functionality that's available in Sheets. So I'm going to just present to you a quick outline of what we're going to go over tonight, and we'll go through each one. I'll try to go at a slow enough pace so you can follow along, but please feel free to go ahead and send me your questions. So we're going to begin with just an overall overview of Google Sheets. So you probably are familiar with docs and slides, and this is the one feature that is mostly used by those in the accounting industry or any sort of number crunchers. But it's actually a great tool for teachers. It can help us create all kinds of organizers for our students, visual organizers, as well as help calculate data if you're running, if you're doing your evaluation plans. So there's really a lot of different ways that you can use it. So during the overview, I'm going to discuss how does a cell work. The Google Sheets is broken up into cells, and the cell will actually allow you to do simple formulas. And depending upon how adventurous you are and how curious you are, you can even do really complicated formulas in your sheet and calculate out different grades, averages, the mean, the median, if you really want to get into those types of things. But we're just going to use some of the simpler functions today just to sort of give us a head start. We're also going to take a look at a feature that's called conditional formatting. And this is really neat too because it provides a visual cue for the student and the teacher as well. Conditional formatting is essentially if you have a given number in a cell, that cell will turn a different color. So if you have a range of grades, say from 0 up to 100, you could color code those so that your students can see, all right, maybe I need to work in this particular area because it's colored yellow. And maybe that helps them visually understand better how you're evaluating them. We're also going to take a look at some of the quick ways to format the sheet so it actually looks like a real rubric. We can move the columns, column widths, the row widths, and we can merge cells, meaning we can combine cells together. So Fortunately, the recording, I am recording the webinar, so there's really no need to take notes. You can just sort of sit back, sort of watch and take it all in. The recording will be available on our website, and I'll send the link to that once we've concluded, so you can go back and take a look. No problem. And then I'm going to show you some examples of rubrics, and all of the examples you'll be able to download and modify for yourself. So even if you're feeling a little bit unsure as to how to create your own rubric, you'll be at least able to copy one and play with it and get more and more comfortable with it. I'm also going to talk about how you can integrate it with Google Classroom. This is also a really great feature which will help to reduce some of the time we spend on having to give it back to the students, have the students look at our feedback and interact with it. So having Google Classroom is also a really great extension of using Google Sheets for the rubrics. I'm also going to give you a few tips and tricks for both Google Classroom and for Google Sheets. I have one rubric that I like to use, which kind of helps my life go a little smoother, and we all know we need that as teachers. And at the end, I'm just going to have some time for everyone to ask some questions, and we'll go through any questions or problems you might have. So that's the overview of our webinar. So I'm going to get started on pulling up just a regular Google Sheet. So I'm going to just open up a blank spreadsheet here. It's often called a spreadsheet. That's terminology that came over from Excel. And when you open up a sheet, you basically have a grid. And in the grid, we have a bunch of what we call cells. And we'll notice that at the top of the grid, we have letters. And if I slide all the way across, you're going to see that those letters go all the way to Z. And if I added more columns, I could even go to AA, AB, etc., etc. Now, on the left-hand side, you're also going to see a series of numbers. Now, why is this important? Why is it important to have the A, the letters on the top, and then the numbers on the side? This will allow us to identify particular cells, and that's going to be important to know as we go forward. So for example, if I'm in the D column, and I go all the way down to number 9, this cell right here is known by the computer and by Google Sheets as D9. So every cell here in the grid has a unique identifier. And so we'll use that as we create our formulas. Now the cell, you have to imagine, is like a little calculator. Each cell can perform some mathematical operation. So if I'm here in C2, I have up in this bar the equation, the formula bar, and I can write my equation here. And it's very simple. All I need to do is put in an equal sign, and I can calculate out a formula. So I'm just going to do a simple one, equals 2 plus 2, and you'll see that it gives me the answer already. It gives me a preview of what that's going to look like. And now when I hit enter, it calculated that for me. If I re-enter the cell, I can see that that formula is still there. Now, what's neat about this is, say I have a series of data points. So I'm just going to put some random numbers in these columns here. And I want to calculate what some of these would add up to. So if I go underneath, I'm going to say, well, this cell equals this cell. And you'll see now all I had to do was click on it, and it automatically put in the cell name, B4. So my formula is going to say equals the value of B4, and now I'm just going to put in a mathematical symbol, plus, and I'm going to click on the next cell underneath, and it gives me that name, another mathematical symbol underneath. I'm going to get, excuse me, that value. And I'm going to keep doing this until I have all of those cells incorporated into my formula. And now all I have to do is hit enter, and I have the sum total of those values. And this is where our self-calculating rubric is really going to come in handy for us. Because once we write that formula, we can use Google Classroom to reproduce the sheet for each student. We can grade each student, and the grade will be automatically calculated for us. So I'm going to clear out these cells and just kind of go back to an empty cell. Now, I built those formulas from scratch using the equals, but we also have over here a list of common functions. So you'll see here that there's the sigma symbol, and if I pull this menu down, you'll see it says functions. And the functions, these are pretty much the basic ones. We have sum, just sort of like what I did before. You can do an average. You can count how many cells have data, and you can do max and min. Now you'll see here that there is an option for more functions, and that's something that you can explore on your own. You can do if functions. So if a cell equals a certain value, then it should return this result. So that's really what Google Sheets does for us. It helps to calculate. But you'll also notice that if you look across this bar, we have lots of ways to change the look of the sheet. And so I'm not limited to this size of the column or to this size of the row. I can change those, make them bigger, make them smaller. So you can probably already start to see how we would take the rubrics that we use now and convert them into a Google Sheet rubric. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to navigate over here. This is an example of a rubric, an old rubric that I used in a prior school. And it's sort of your typical rubric setup. You have here your domains, you have your descriptors, and then you also have the differing levels. So we're all fairly familiar with this type of format. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to copy this, and I'm going to put it in to a Google Sheet. So to do that, I'm just going to select these cells here, and I'm going to copy them by doing Control or Command C. And I'm going to go back to the sheet that I opened up. And I'm just simply going to paste it in. Now, when I do that, it looks kind of a bit of a jumbled mess. But what we can do is we can use some of these operations and some of these formatting tools up at the top to make it look like it did on the Google Doc. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select those cells, and I'm going to go up here, and I'm going to wrap the text. So right now, this is in the overflow mode. If I move over one, it's going to wrap the text. So that means that the text will not continue to flow over the cell, but it will wrap around much like a paragraph. So I'm going to do that. And so now you see it's starting to look a little bit more like a regular rubric. Now it's kind of still looking a little ugly, so I want to try to make it a little bit more user-friendly. So I'm going to start at the top and work my way down. Here we have the different performance levels. So I've selected those cells, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to center those in the column. So I'm going to come up here to the alignment, and I'm going to pull this down, and I'm going to do a center alignment. Next, what I'm going to do is I want to change my font. I'm going to make it a little more interesting, a little more pleasing. And then I'm also going to change the size. Now, when I change the size of the font and I make it bigger, it's actually going to automatically adjust the row height. So now if I go all the way up to 18, you'll see that this row height has gotten bigger to accommodate that size. So that works for those column headers. Now I'm going to do the same thing for the text. I'm going to select those. I'm going to choose a more easily readable text. I see here it's bolded, so I'm going to unbold that. And I noticed that in copying some of the text, there was a little bit of a glitch. So I'm going to just fix that glitch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy what was text that was put in, and I'm going to replace it with what should be the apostrophe. So there we go. So we fixed that. Now, I'd also like to have my text align at the top. So I'm going to do like I did before, select those cells. I'm going to go back up to my menu bar, and I'm going to change the vertical alignment. I'm going to change it from bottom to top. And there we go. So now we've got the bottom, we've got it up to the top. I'm going to fix now in the formula bar some of the text, just clean it up. And you can see that it's starting to take shape more and more. Now, one of the things I want to do is I want to add a title to this rubric. So I want to insert a row. So up at the top, I'm going to select this entire row simply by clicking on the number 1. So I'll do that again. I'm just going to select a random cell. So I go up to the number 1, and I'm going to click on it. And now I've selected the whole row. I'm going to go up to my menu. I'm going to pull that down, and I'm going to insert a row above. And there we go. So now I've got a nice row to do my title. So I'm actually going to adjust the width of that row, and that's pretty easy to do. I'm going to take my cursor, and I'm going to put it over the line between the 1 and 2 until it changes to that arrow with the blue. I'm going to click down and hold it, and I'm just going to drag down, and you can see it's going to make it bigger. So I'm going to call this my world language group speaking rubric. Now what I want to do with this is, you can see it's overflowing, and that's fine. I could leave it like that. But the other option that I want to do is I actually want to merge this cell, the cell next to it, and this cell, so it all becomes one. And that becomes useful when you're starting to create your rubrics and you're getting further and further in the process and you want it to look a little neater. So to do that, I'm going to select those 3, and I'm going to go over to the merge tool, which is right here. And all I have to do is click on merge, and now it's become one cell. So if I click out, you'll see that there's no separator line here anymore. This is one cell. So again, I'm going to change my font, make it a little more interesting. And I notice now because it's bigger, maybe I need to go into the next cell. So I'm going to just select those 2, merge them, and there we go. So now I've added a title to my rubric. I've merged the cells. And now what I want to do is I want to start creating that sort of self-calculation. So what we're going to do first is I'm just going to spread these columns out. You know, I want my students to be able to read it in a little bit more comfortable fashion. So I'm going to select this whole column by clicking on the C. And I'm also going to hold down the Shift key and select D, E, and F. And what I can do is, like I did before with the row, I can put my cursor on that line between the columns, and if I just pull it a little bit, it's going to widen not only the E column, but all four that I have highlighted. And when I do that, it's going to spread it out. So now I have a more pleasing looking rubric. I'm going to just do a little bit more, and maybe just a little bit more. All right. So here we go. So we have a pretty decent looking rubric. Now it's time to get into some of our functions. So what I'm going to do is in this last column over here, in this cell, the G4, I'm going to do a little trick. I don't want to actually have to type in whatever the score is, whether it's a 4 or a 3. I want to try to just have a drop-down menu. So we're going to create a really quick drop-down menu for this box. So in order to do that, I'm going to go over here to Data, and I'm going to select Data Validation. Now, what does that mean? That means I'm going to determine what type of value can go in to this cell. So I'm going to limit the possibilities. So if I click on it, I have this window. It's telling me, okay, do you want to create this limit on sheet 1 in cell G4? And that's where I want it. And what's the criteria going to look like? So I want to tell Google Sheets what values are allowed. So I'm going to actually pull this down, and I'm going to select List of Items. So now what I'm going to do is, because I've selected List of Items, I can tell Sheets what I want. And so we have 4 possibilities. The student can get a 4, 3, 2, or a 1. So those are the only possibilities that a user will be able to put into that cell. I'm actually going to put another symbol in here, which is a dash, because that will be my base rubric, so that when it gets copied, this dash will appear in this cell. All right. You'll also notice that I had to put commas in between to separate them. So let's take a look. What is this going to look like? So I'll hit save. And you'll notice now that in this cell, there's an arrow. So when I'm grading and I want to give the student a grade based on utilisation du français, I'm going to go over here and I'm going to click on the arrow, and I have now a drop-down menu. And all I have to do is select the score that I want to give to the student. Now, you'll notice that the 3 looks pretty sad, so we're actually going to beef him up. We're going to choose another font. We're going to make it bigger. And we're also going to change this orientation. So it'll be here on the side, and I'm even going to make it a little bit bigger and do a 24. Let's go bigger, 36. All right. So that's the score for this domain. So now that I've created that, I can just use copy and paste to put it in the other cells in the other domains. Now, before I do that, I also want to put a border around it. So you'll notice that the regular rubric here also has a border around each cell. So I'm going to go up, and you're going to see here there's like a funny looking box, looks like a window. That's actually how you can do a border. So all I have to do is select the cell that I want the border to appear around and just click it. Now it gives me some options. I can do all the borders, the interior, the horizontal, so forth and so on. So I'm just going to click all borders because it's only the one cell. And when I move out of it, you'll see now it's got a border around it. So I'm going to go back in And I'm actually going to hit Command C, so I'm copying it. You'll notice it's got the broken line around it. That means that that cell has been copied. And I'm going to click into the next cell, and I'm going to hit Command V. And you'll see that the data validation, as well as the number, have been copied. So all I have to do is just repeat the process for the other domains. So here you go. So now I've given this student a 3 for everything. But what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to put the rubric on reset. So I'm going to put all of these at the dash. All right. So now this is what your rubric will look like, your template, when you open it up and you're ready to grade. But now what we still have to do is we have to be able to create that self-grading piece. How do we get the score? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pretend that I've scored this student. So I'm going to just fill in some values. And so here we go. I've got all kinds of values here for these 5 different domains. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to the cell that's right up above it, and I'm going to write my formula. I'm going to write the formula that's going to sum all of those scores. So to do that, there's a couple ways. I could do simply equals and click on the G4 and do plus and click on the G5 and just repeat that process all the way down. And that will give me the total, which is 16. So now I'm going to change my formatting again. I'll probably use that, make it nice and big, put it in the center. And so there's my score. Make it nice and bold. And so that's how I created a very simple formula to do that addition for me. Now, a lot of times I like to use a conversion to take the rubric score of a 16 and put it to an actual letter score or point score. So how can we do that? So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go down here to this part of the Google Sheet, and you'll see here that its name is Sheet 1. I'm going to rename it. And to do that, I'm going to click on the arrow and go up to rename. And so I'm going to call this barème, so for my rubric, and just hit enter. Now that I've done that, I want to add another sheet over here. So I'm going to go to the plus sign, and that's going to add a new sheet into this whole file. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this conversion. And so what I'm going to do is in this sheet, I'm going to paste in some values that I've already determined to convert the rubric score to a letter grade. So what I've already done, and this will also be available on the wiki site, is I've created a separate rubric conversion document. So here's what the conversion document looks like. If you see at the bottom of the screen, I have a lot of different tabs. And all of the tabs at the bottom represent the total points of the rubric. So if this rubric that we're working on is 20, I'm going to go to the 20 tab. And if I want to give this assignment a 20-point value, I'll use this set of values. If I want it to be a 50-point, I'll use this set. But I'm going to use the 100-point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select these, and I'm going to copy it, and I'm actually going to go back to the original sheet, and I'm going to paste those values onto the conversion page. So to do that, I'm going to go to File, and I actually want to do I'm going to go to Edit. I want to do a Paste Special, because I want to paste just the values. So here you go. We've got all of the values pasted in, and I'm just going to adjust what it looks like, and also adjust the column width so that everything fits together. There we go. And so I can see that if a student scores an 18 on the rubric, that's the equivalent of a 92% or an A-. Now this conversion grid, of course, you can change, you can use and put in whatever values you want. So now what I need to do is I'm going to tell the sheet to look up the value. So if I have the value of 16 on this sheet, there's a formula I can use that will go to this worksheet, find the number 16, and return the value of 87, and display it right here above the 16. So let's learn how to do that. So I'm going to open up this row, and I'm going to go into the cell. And what I'm going to do is, this is another way to access those formulas that you most often use. So I'm going to hit the equals key, and I know that the name of this formula I want to use is called H lookup. And so once I start typing in H and lookup, it brings up a menu of all of the available formulas. So all I have to do is click on it with my mouse, and it's actually going to give me sort of a guide as to how do I create this lookup formula. So I'm going to keep the guide right there. I'm going to slide the page over. And so the first element that I have to put in this formula is the search key. The search key is the value that I'm telling the sheet to go look for. And that's really simple. That's right here. So I'm going to click on G3 or 16, and it's going to populate it for me. Now you notice that the help has sort of disappeared, but don't panic. All you have to do is hit the comma, and it comes back. So we've determined what the search key is, and now we've got to tell it what the range is. Where is the range of values to look for? So again, I'm just going to take my mouse, and this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the conversion tab, because I want to tell it to go look on that tab for the values. So I'll do that. Notice my formula is still there, because Sheets is saying you're still building this formula, so we're with you. I'm going to take the mouse, and I'm just going to start with that very first upper left-hand value. And I'm going to click and hold down, and I'm going to drag across, and now I'm going to drag down. And you'll notice that I've selected all of those values. All of those values are now in purple. So the formula is going to say, okay, I'm going to look for the value of G3 in that very top row of 6 and find 16. But now what I need to do is I need to tell it which of the rows to return. So let's hit our comma and go back, and you'll see that it's asking for the index. The index is simply a number, and it's the number of the row that you want the value to return. So for example, the first row here is number 1. So 16 is in the number 1 row. But I want the value of 87 to be returned, and that's in the second row. So I'm going to put in the number 2. Now you'll see it kind of gives me a little preview. It says 54, but you know what? My formula isn't complete yet. So don't panic. I'm going to hit comma, and what do you notice? It's now changed to 87. So it has. It's found 16, and it's found the corresponding value of 87. Now, the last piece to it is asking, is the data sorted? And it's always going to be false. So I'm going to go ahead and just type in false. And then I'm going to end my formula with the parentheses. And that's it. I've completed my lookup formula. So watch what happens. Now I'm going to hit enter. I go back to that original Barème worksheet, and now I have 87. All I've got to do is match up the formatting. That's it. There we go. And it's changed. There we go. And let's just, for sake of trying it out, let's say I'm going to be kind to this student. I'm going to change it from a 2 to a 3 because, maybe they weren't so bad. So I'm going to change it to a 3, and you'll see that everything has automatically recalculated. It's gone up to the 17, and now the percent score has gone back up to an 89. So it's really a great way to sort of make it so much more efficient for us as we do our grades and as we put these together. So I'm going to review how I did that lookup, because I want to create another lookup formula so it can return the letter grade. So here we go. One more time. I'm going to hit equals. I'm going to start typing the name of the formula, which is H for horizontal, and then lookup. I'm going to click on it. My search key. Now again, I'm going to use the same search key. So G3, comma. I'm going to select my range, going to conversion. I'm going to select again that set of data, comma, but this time for my index, instead of 2, I want to put in 3. So I'll put in 3, comma, and now I'm going to type in false. It's always going to be false. I'm going to end parentheses, enter. We go back to the original sheet, and here we have our letter grade. So I'm going to adjust again one more time. And there it is. So you now have a self-calculating rubric that you can reproduce for every student, and it will recalculate every time. So here's one example of a rubric, a classic rubric, using these formulas and to create something that will be very efficient. So I have some other samples that I'd like to run through with you. So I'm going to start with a finalized version of what I just showed you. So there's a lot of things that you can do to your rubric to make it a little bit more interesting. So here you can see I have my title, a subtitle. I put in some colors going across, going down, and just by playing around with formatting and working with the different options that are available to you, you can really make it your own. So here I have some red, white, and blue for French. So again, here this is called scale, but that's the conversion table that you have on that side. So that's a traditional type of rubric that you can create. I like to use a different kind of rubric. This is an example of a standards-based rubric. So what we've done in our department is we've taken the AP descriptors for what a 5 uh, example of work looks like. So for example, here provides, this is for the interpersonal speaking, the simulated conversation. And we've taken the performance descriptors, provides required information with frequent elaboration, and we've broken those down into more specific standards. So here is standard 1. I can provide appropriate responses to the questions asked of me. And so students will receive either a 2, a 1, or a 0. And so what do those mean? So over here is my key. I have 2, which means, I got this. I've mastered this standard. I know how to do it consistently. 1, almost, with a little bit more work, I'm sure I'll get there. Or a 0, meaning, not yet. And that, we all know Carol Dweck's power of not yet. And so this is a powerful way to get students to focus on what I can work on. And so this is another type of rubric that we've built. And I'm going to just fill in some values here. And you'll see that as I do, the top piece actually changes. So I can sort of see, as I'm going along, their overall performance. So I'm just going to fill in some random types of grades here. And you're probably wondering, how is it that you can scroll down and those top rows aren't really going anywhere? And that's called the freeze function. So I'm going to show that to you actually in just a second. Here we go. So, all right, there we go. So our student finishes with an 84, a B. So you see the rubric score, you see the percent score, as well as the letter grade. So you notice there's a thick gray bar right here. And so in order to make any piece of the sheet stationary, no matter if you are moving down, up, across, you simply would just go to View and use the freeze. So you can either freeze the first row, the second row, or if you've already selected a row, up to that row that you've selected. You can do the same thing with the columns as well. I find this really helpful as I'm filling out the rubric. It just sort of gives me a sense of, how is this student doing? Are they struggling, or, and it just sort of helps keep everything in perspective. The other element that I like to incorporate into my rubrics, which is also handy for the students, are some resources. So for example, here I have, we're working on conversation, and we're working on strategies to fill those pauses, giving you some time to think about what to say. So if this student received a 1, I have a resource on the other side here that they can access. So this is actually a hyperlink to a Quizlet list that I've created that has French filler words and phrases. So all the student has to do is click on the hyperlink, and it will take them to that list, and they'll be able to practice it, memorize, try to incorporate those things into their speaking the next time around. So this is a great way of not just providing feedback, but providing some direction to students to allow them to self-advocate, self-motivate, and actually address what needs to be addressed. So you'll see here I have some other resources. Some of the students misunderstand sometimes the questions. So I found a great podcast on Français Facile, which is in the same theme that we're currently working on, to give them some practice to listen to some other dialogues. You'll also notice that here I incorporated the scale. Sometimes students like to be able to see just exactly where they are and how they perform on the scale. And it just gives them sort of a better idea of how they're doing. So that's one example of a rubric that we use. We have here another one. And it might look kind of strange, but it's a way to actually make Google Classroom work for you. So what does that mean? You'll notice here that I have a cover sheet on the rubric. And here there's a symbol that's taking the place of what's going to be the grade. So when I'm going to score, I'm actually going to access the second tab, and I'm going to just start filling in the values. And as I do that, you'll see that the symbol has now disappeared. And as the grade continues to change, what's going to happen is on that first sheet, that symbol will also change and will equal the grade of the student. So I'm just going to fill in some grades here for the student. And so you'll notice that this student now has ended with an A-, a 91. Now if I go back to my cover sheet, you'll see that that 91 is here, large, for the student. To do that formula, it's pretty straightforward. Again, you would just click in the cell, and this is a bunch of merged cells. You would hit the equals key, and then you would click on the barème tab and select the score, which is right here. Now, why would we do this? Why would we have this score so large? Well, if you've ever worked with Google Classroom, you know that if you attach an assignment if you attach a rubric to an assignment, I should say, a lot of times you don't know what the score is, and you have to actually open up the document. But what's neat about what Google Classroom does, they give you a preview of what that file looks like. So we're using the preview as a way to tell us what the score was in that file without having to go in and open it up. So for example, I have my student right here, and instead of having to go in and open up that Google Sheet, which takes time, his score is right here. Now I could put his score also with the score with all the other scores for the regular Google Classroom, but I didn't want to put this in as an actual grade. I wanted this score to represent the fact that the student completed it. So I gave them a 1 out of 1, because this is really a practice. This was a practice listening that we did in relation to a dialogue. And so this gave me a way to be able to see all of their scores really quickly in Google Classroom. So that's a neat little trick that you can try, and this particular rubric is available for download if you want to try it yourself. The last sample that I'm going to walk you through uses that conditional formatting that we talked about earlier. So you notice here that there are a lot of colors. And this rubric comes from my colleague, Evan Downey, who I'd like to thank for sending this my way. And so he has on this side categories, and these are sort of his participation categories and use of the language in class. And so in this column, he then has the score. So here he's given it a number. And based on the number that's entered, the cell will actually change colors. And so here we can equate green as being good. Green is for go. Yellow is for caution. And well, red, got to watch out. So how would you do this conditional formatting? So what we would do is we're going to just take this one cell, F3, for example, and we're actually going to go up to see format. And the conditional formatting option is right here. So I'm going to head and click on that. And you're going to see now that we have different types of formulas that have been written to create a color based on the data. And what it is you've basically made a rule. You're saying that if the value in this cell is above a certain amount or below a certain amount, the cell should equal this color. So let's take a look at what this rule right here looks like. And so the rule is being applied to a range. And so what's the range? Well, the range is just a single cell, F3. And then the next piece is, all right, format the cell if. So we're creating some sort of if situation. So if the value in the cell is between 5 and 30, this is what the color is going to look like. And so you can change what the color looks like by going to custom. And so that's what we did here. So we went to custom format and we changed the fill color. So you can use a rainbow or you can use the red, yellow, green, any of those to create that effect. And so we've done that for this particular cell. So you can see that a 5 through 30 is sort of a warning zone, a pretty big warning zone. If we go back up, there's a second rule. And if we look at that rule says, okay, once the value is between 32 and 35, we have to use yellow. We're going to use a yellow color. So that's more of a gentler warning. We'll look at another rule right here. Now this is a little bit more sophisticated, but it still works on the same concept of if the value is between a certain amount, it's going to equal this color. And let's see what we got here. So if you've got a 45, then the cell is going to equal green. In this box, you can determine the rule. So you have lots of rules here. So you can determine, is the cell empty, not empty? The ones that are of the most value to us are the ones right here that say greater than, less than, is equal to, and they work really well to help create that formula or that warning. So you can see the example that's given here. The student can very quickly visually get a sense of, wow, okay, my participation here is occasional. I got to work on that. Or, the teacher's always encouraging me to participate. Maybe I should try to up my game. Or, I got a 14 here. This is really good. I'm doing all right here. But yeah, I don't really listen all that well. So it helps to give that student a better, quicker visual understanding of where they are. So that pretty much brings us to the question and answer phase of using the rubrics. I'm just going to show you really quickly on our website. If you scroll down, here are each of the samples that you saw today, as well as the rubric conversion tables. And if you click on any of those, you'll be able to make a copy. So all you have to do is hit make a copy. So here's another little freebie tip. If you ever want to share a Google Doc or a Google Sheet with someone, all you have to do is you copy the web address for it, and you change the last few letters. It's usually edit. You change edit to copy, and then you can email that to whomever you want to share it with, and they'll get this message. And so you won't mess up your original. They'll make a copy of it. So you're all free to download any of these to start using your own rubrics and maybe converting what you've got. And I'm available for any questions, of course, by email, so please feel free. So I didn't know if anybody had any questions that they'd like to ask through the chat. I'd be willing to walk you through any particular aspects of the rubrics. All right. Well, it seems like we're pretty good. So, what I'm going to do is this video will be available on the website, and you'll be able to rewatch this. I did get another question here. Can you explain how you upload the rubrics to Google Classroom? Yeah, absolutely. So let's panic some of my students. How about that? So we're going to go. I'm going to open up a Google Classroom. These are my seniors, so they're pretty relaxed about it. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create an assignment in Google Classroom. So we'll go down here. We'll create the assignment today. All right, here we go. We're going to create the assignment. So we're going to say test rubric. And what I'm going to do is I am going to go into my Google Drive. So I'm going to go to Google Drive. And usually these things appear in my recent folders. So here's an example. I'm going to post this sample rubric number 1. And I'm going to select that one and I'm going to add it. And now here's the really important part. I'm going to go over here where it says student can view file. And I'm going to change that. I'm going to change it to make a copy for each student. So what's going to happen is when I assign this, it's actually going to duplicate it and make one for each student. So let's do it. Let's assign it. And so here it is. So this is my small group of seniors. I'm going to go into the actual assignment. And now you're going to see that for every student, they've now got a copy individual of the rubric. So I can go into this one and I can adjust the score. Now here I loaded one that already had some pre-filled scores. So let's say that Margot she's one of my really good students. She does really well, so I'm just gonna give her all 4s. All I have to do now is I'm done, I close out of it, and that's it. And then I can return it to the student, and the student gets to see it. So the next question about editing. So what happens is I can hold on to the rubric by not returning it. And so then that way they can't edit it. But as soon as I do return it, they could edit the score. I've never had a student edit scores because what I end up doing is putting the score into my grade book. And obviously, if there's a discrepancy, the one that counts is the one that goes into my grade book. So that's a really great way to reduce the paper having to go back and forth, and allowing the students to be able to look at their progress, access some of those online resources as well. All right. I am going to change some of these sharing permissions here because I think they need to be shared with everybody. Let's see. All right. Well, great. I'm glad that this was helpful. If there are any other questions out there, please feel free. I'm going to hang on the line. Everyone else, thank you very much for joining me this evening. And I will be sure to send out the link to the video, and you can rewatch it at your leisure. And I encourage you to try this with your students. Start on a small scale, do a really simple rubric, and then just keep building from there, playing and just experimenting. It's always the best way. All right, great. Merci à tous et c'est avec plaisir que je vous offre. OK. Merci et à la prochaine fois.